The security guard's hand was already on my elbow when Marcus said it. "Don't make this hard, Alex." His voice was cold, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. We stood in the middle of the open office, and every single head was turned toward us. I could hear keyboards going silent, one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The afternoon sun came through the windows, making everything feel surreal and overexposed. Marcus held out his hand, palm up, waiting. "Badge? Phone? Laptop? Now." His tone was the same one you'd use with a shoplifter. I'd worked at Sentinel Tech for 6 years, 6 years of 12-hour days and weekend calls. I built their entire cybersecurity infrastructure from the ground up with my own 2 hands. I stopped 3 major breach attempts last year alone, saving the company millions in potential damages and lawsuits. And now, I was being walked out like I'd been caught stealing office supplies from the supply closet. My badge hung around my neck on the standard blue lanyard, the little LED light blinking green. Active. Authorized. Trusted. I unclipped it slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hand one last time, and dropped it into Marcus's waiting palm. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. Coward. "This is unnecessary," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking with anger. "Company policy," Marcus replied, still not meeting my eyes. He was staring at a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. "When someone's terminated, we escort them out immediately. Security risk." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Security risk. Me. The person who actually understood what security meant around here. The person who had spent 6 years protecting this company from actual threats. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too tight. The security guard, an older guy named Tom, looked genuinely uncomfortable as he stood there. His weathered face showed sympathy, but he had a job to do. I'd known Tom for years. We'd shared coffee breaks and complained about management together. Now he was part of my humiliation. "Let's go, Alex," Tom said softly. "Make it easy on yourself." I grabbed my personal coffee mug from my desk, the one my sister gave me for Christmas 3 years ago. It said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." Perfect. I left everything else. They could keep their company laptop and their company phone. But they had no idea what they were really losing today. 2 weeks earlier, everything was normal. I was sitting in my basement office, the one with no windows and fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly, monitoring the firewall logs like I did every single morning. Red text scrolling across black screens, normal traffic patterns, nothing suspicious, just another Tuesday. Then Marcus scheduled an emergency meeting out of nowhere. The calendar invite popped up on my screen at 9:45. Subject line, "Organizational restructuring, confidential." My stomach dropped immediately. I'd seen this before at other companies where I had friends. Restructuring was corporate speak for someone's getting cut. Budget cuts dressed up in fancy language. I just didn't think it would be me. I was essential, wasn't I? The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. I spent the hours in between trying to figure out what was coming. I reviewed my performance metrics. All green. I checked my last evaluation, exceeded expectations in every category. I looked at the budget reports I had access to. The security department was under budget for the year. Nothing made sense. At 1:55, I walked upstairs to the conference room. My badge beeped as I swiped into the executive floor. Marcus was already there, sitting at the head of the table. Jennifer from HR sat next to him. She had that look on her face. You know the one. The expression people get when they're about to ruin your day, but they want you to know they feel really bad about it. Sympathetic eyebrows, tight smile, hands folded on the table in front of a manila folder. The folder probably had my severance paperwork already printed and ready. They'd made the decision before I even walked into the room. "Have a seat, Alex," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe they were just shuffling responsibilities. Maybe this was about a promotion. Maybe I was being paranoid. "We're moving in a new direction," Marcus began. He was using his professional voice, the one he practiced in the mirror. "We've hired a managed security service provider to handle all cybersecurity operations remotely. It's more cost-effective for the company's current needs and future growth." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "You're outsourcing security?" The words came out flat, disbelieving. We're modernizing our approach, he corrected, like that made it better. The MSSP brings enterprise-level expertise and round-the-clock monitoring that we frankly don't have in-house. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to ask him if he even knew what an MSSP was, or if he just read it off a sales brochure. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. When? My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. End of month, Jennifer said softly, sliding the manila folder across the polished table toward me. We'll provide 2 weeks severance, of course, plus accumulated vacation pay. Your health insurance will continue through the end of next month. We think that's more than fair, given the circumstances. 2 weeks severance, for 6 years of service. I didn't open the folder. I just stared at it sitting there on the table between us. The MSSP team will need a knowledge transfer, Marcus continued, checking items off some invisible list in his head. We'll need you to document all current systems, processes, and access credentials. Derek Palmer will be your primary contact. He's their lead engineer assigned to our account. Derek Palmer, I repeated. The name meant nothing to me. Some kid with certifications who'd probably never dealt with a real security incident in his life. He's very qualified, Jennifer added quickly, like she could read my thoughts. He has his CSSP and several years of experience with enterprise clients. Certifications. Great. I had real-world experience, but apparently that wasn't worth keeping on payroll. I didn't argue in that meeting. I didn't throw things or make threats or tell Marcus what a catastrophic mistake he was making. I just nodded slowly, picked up the folder, and walked back to my basement office. My hands were steady now, but my mind was racing like a supercomputer, processing 1,000,000 calculations at once. Sentinel Tech wasn't some rinky-dink small operation. We had 3 geographically distributed data centers, 42 production servers, and over 300 employees across 5 different states. Our client list included 2 major hospitals, a law firm that handled medical malpractice cases, and a manufacturing company that did sensitive government contracts. Security wasn't some optional nice-to-have feature. It was absolutely everything. One breach could destroy the entire company. I pulled up the documentation I'd been maintaining religiously for 6 years. Network diagrams with every connection mapped. Access control lists showing who could access what. Firewall rules I'd carefully configured and tested. Patch schedules coordinated to minimize downtime. Incident response procedures I'd written based on real attacks we'd faced. Then I looked at what the new MSSP would be getting from the standard onboarding package Marcus had approved. The basic documentation was there, sure. Enough to keep the lights on under normal circumstances. But it didn't include the real knowledge. It didn't include the fact that Server 14 had a memory leak in the backup application that required a manual reboot every 72 hours, or it would crash and corrupt the backup database. It didn't mention that the firewall in the Chicago office would completely lock up if you tried to push firmware updates during business hours because of some weird conflict with their VoIP phone system. It didn't explain that our CEO's laptop had a custom exception rule in the security policy because he absolutely refused to use 2-factor authentication and threatened to fire anyone who forced the issue. It didn't document the fact that the legacy accounting application still ran on Windows Server 2008 because the software vendor had gone out of business and updating the server OS would break everything. I'd spent 6 years learning all these little details. 6 years of 3 a.m. phone calls and weekend emergency fixes. 6 years of keeping everything running smoothly while Marcus took credit for our industry-leading uptime and security posture in board meetings. And now he'd decided that knowledge wasn't worth $90,000 a year. Fine, I'd let them figure it out themselves. I spent my remaining 2 weeks doing exactly what I was supposed to do. I came in every morning at 8. I monitored the systems, I responded to help desk tickets, I smiled and nodded, and I documented everything. Well, almost everything. I documented what the MSSP would need to keep basic operations running. Network diagrams, the official ones, not the ones with all my handwritten notes about quirks and workarounds. Standard operating procedures, the textbook versions, not the real-world ones that actually worked. Access credentials, the main ones, not the backup accounts and emergency access points. I created a neat, organized transition folder and uploaded it to the shared drive. It looked comprehensive. It looked professional. It would pass any audit. But it was like giving someone a recipe without mentioning that your oven runs 20 degrees hot. On my last scheduled day, before the walkout happened, I handed over my credentials to the MSSP team lead. His name was Derek Palmer, just like Marcus had said. He was young, maybe 24, 25 at most. Fresh-faced, confident. He had that new certification energy, like he'd just passed his exams and thought he knew everything. "We've got it from here," Derek said, barely glancing at the transition notes I'd prepared. He was too busy looking at his tablet, probably comparing our setup to the template his company used. "This setup is pretty standard, basic enterprise configuration. We do these conversions all the time." "Sure," I said, keeping my voice neutral and my face expressionless. I didn't mention that nothing about our setup was actually standard. I didn't mention the custom VLAN configuration I'd built to isolate the hospital client data because of HIPAA requirements. I didn't mention the legacy application running on Server 2008 or the workarounds required to keep it secure. I didn't tell him about Server 14's memory leak or the Chicago firewall's firmware sensitivity. If he was such an expert, he'd figure it out. That was the plan anyway. Let them learn the hard way what expertise actually meant. Then the early walkout happened. I was supposed to work until 5 o'clock that Friday. Instead, at 2:15, Marcus appeared at my office door with Tom the security guard standing behind him. "Alex, we need you to come with us," Marcus said. His voice was tight, nervous. I looked up from my monitor where I was running a routine security scan. "I'm in the middle of something. My shift ends at 5. "We're terminating your access effective immediately," Marcus said. "New policy from corporate. When someone leaves, especially from a security role, we can't risk any data exposure during their final hours." Data exposure. Like I was suddenly going to turn into a criminal because they were firing me. "You're walking me out early," I said slowly. It wasn't a question. "Company policy," Marcus repeated. He was hiding behind that phrase like a shield. I saved my work and stood up. The walk through the office was the longest walk of my life. Every eye in the building was on us. My coworkers, people I'd helped countless times, just stared. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked away, embarrassed. Nobody said anything. What could they say? Tom stayed close to my elbow, not touching me, but making it clear this was an escort. We walked through the main floor, past the cubicles where developers worked, past the conference rooms with their glass walls, past the break room where I'd eaten lunch 1,000 times, through the lobby with its fake plants and motivational posters. Marcus held the door open. The spring air hit my face, warm and somehow wrong. My car was parked in the same spot I'd used for 6 years, under the old oak tree in the back corner of the lot. The paint was faded on the lines, worn down by 6 years of my tires in the exact same position. I climbed in, tossed my personal box onto the passenger seat and sat there for a long minute. My hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, from pure, white-hot rage. Marcus thought he was being smart. Cutting costs. Modernizing. Bringing in the experts. He had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. I pulled out my personal laptop from under the driver's seat. It was a habit I'd developed years ago after a former coworker got fired and lost access to all his personal files stored on company systems. I kept a backup machine that wasn't tied to the company network. It was my safety net, my insurance policy. I opened it and connected to my phone's hotspot, bypassing any company network monitoring. Then I logged into my personal cloud storage, the one Marcus didn't know existed. Inside that cloud folder was everything, not the sanitized official documentation I'd handed to Derek. The real documentation. 6 years of institutional knowledge, compressed into scripts, notes, diagrams, and troubleshooting guides. Every weird quirk, every workaround, every 3 a.m. fix I'd figured out through trial and error. But I also had something else. Something Marcus definitely didn't know about. When I built Sentinel's security infrastructure 3 years ago, I built it with a failsafe. A backdoor administrator account that existed completely outside the normal Active Directory structure. It wasn't malicious or nefarious. It was a legitimate recovery option in case the main domain controller ever catastrophically failed and locked everyone out. I'd actually disclosed it to Marcus when I created it. I'd sent him an email explaining the technical necessity. He'd replied, "Sounds good, do whatever you need to do," and signed off on it. Then, he'd apparently completely forgotten it existed because IT people are invisible until something breaks. That account was still active. I checked right there in the parking lot. The username was sysrecovery, and the password was a 32-character randomly generated string I kept in my encrypted password manager. I logged in remotely through the VPN. The system accepted my credentials without question. I could see everything. Network traffic flowing through the routers, user login sessions, system health monitors, Active Directory structure. I could even see Derek logged in right now, poking around the firewall settings like a kid who'd found his dad's power tools and was trying to figure out which button did what. I watched him for a few minutes. He was checking basic things, port configurations, rule counts. He opened the Chicago office firewall config and I held my breath, waiting to see if he'd notice the firmware version warning. He scrolled right past it. Of course he did. I closed the laptop. I wasn't going to do anything with that access. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I wasn't that kind of person. But I was going to watch. I was going to see exactly what happened when you replaced institutional knowledge with a service contract. I started the car and drove home. I had a feeling it was going to be an interesting few weeks. I wasn't wrong. The first sign of trouble came on day 3. I was sitting at a coffee shop downtown, working on my resume and browsing job postings, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jamie, one of the junior IT guys who'd survived the restructuring. Jamie was a good kid, eager to learn, always asking questions. "Dude, the Chicago office is completely down. Derek's freaking out. You around?" I stared at the message for a moment, sipping my overpriced latte. The Chicago office was down. Of course it was. I could picture exactly what happened. Derek had decided to be proactive and update the firewall firmware. He'd probably done it at 2 in the afternoon when everyone was working. The firewall had locked up mid-update because of the VoIP conflict I'd never documented. Now 300 users in Chicago couldn't access email, couldn't process orders, couldn't do anything. I typed back slowly, "Not my problem anymore, Jamie. Sorry." 3 dots appeared immediately as Jamie typed a response. "I know, but he's asking if you have any notes about the Chicago firewall. Something about firmware compatibility?" I smiled despite myself. The Chicago firewall, of course. I'd warned about that in my documentation. Well, in the detailed documentation that I'd kept to myself. The transition notes I'd given Derek just said, "Firewall, FortiGate 6000, firmware version 6.2.4. Nothing about why it was that specific version. "Sorry," I texted back to Jamie. I handed over everything in the transition folder. "That's all I've got. Maybe check with Derek's company? They're the experts, right?" Jamie sent back a frustrated emoji and then nothing else. I felt a small stab of guilt. Jamie was a good kid. He didn't deserve to get caught in the middle of this mess. But this was the lesson Marcus needed to learn. You don't throw away 6 years of expertise to save a salary and then expect everything to magically keep working. Actions have consequences. By the end of the first week, my phone was buzzing constantly, not from official company channels. Marcus would never reach out directly. That would be admitting he'd made a mistake. But the people who actually did the day-to-day work, the ones who knew I'd been keeping the ship afloat, they were reaching out privately. Server 14 crashed again. Did you have a monitoring script for that? The VPN isn't authenticating remote users from the mobile app. Any idea why? We got locked out of the backup administration console. Do you remember the recovery key? I didn't respond to most of them. It wasn't out of spite or cruelty. It was principle. They'd walked me out like a criminal. They'd decided my knowledge was replaceable with a service contract, so now they could replace it. Let Derek and his fancy CSSP certification figure it out. On day 9, I logged into my hidden admin account just to check the overall system health. What I saw made me whistle low under my breath. 4 servers were running with critical disk space warnings, the red alerts flashing on the dashboard. The automated backup job hadn't completed successfully in 6 consecutive days. And someone, Probably Derek, trying to optimize things, had disabled half the firewall rules because he didn't understand what they actually did. The network was like a car with 3 flat tires and a check engine light. Somehow still moving, but not for much longer. I took screenshots of everything, not for revenge or blackmail, for documentation and protection. If this ended up in court, if they tried to blame me for something or claim I'd sabotaged systems, I wanted time-stamped proof of what the network looked like before and after I left. I saved everything to my encrypted cloud storage with dates and times. The email came on day 12. It didn't come to my personal email where they should have sent it. It came to my old work email address, which I could still access through the webmail portal because Derek hadn't thought to disable it yet. From Marcus Webb, subject consulting opportunity. Sent, 3:47 p.m. The message was exactly 3 sentences long and dripped with corporate fakeness. Alex, we're experiencing some minor technical challenges with the transition to our new security provider. Would you be available for a short-term consulting engagement to assist the MSSP team with some institutional knowledge transfer? Please advise your hourly rate and availability. I read it twice, then a third time just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Consulting engagement, not "we made a terrible mistake" or "we need you back." Not even a simple "we were wrong." Just a polite, sterile request to fix their mess at my own expense and on their timeline. Minor technical challenges. That was rich. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to my personal account for documentation, then deleted it from the work server. If Marcus wanted to talk to me, he could try harder than a 3-sentence email. He could pick up the phone and use actual words like a human being. Day 14 was when things got seriously bad. I was at home watching Netflix, trying to relax and forget about Sentinel Tech when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Alex, it's Tom, from security." Tom's voice sounded stressed and tired. I could hear noise in the background, people talking loudly. "Hey Tom, what's up?" I tried to sound casual even though my heart rate had already picked up. Something was very wrong. "Listen, I'm not supposed to be calling you," Tom said, lowering his voice. "But we have a serious situation here. The building access control system is completely locked up. Nobody can badge in or out. We've got about 50 people standing outside in the parking lot freezing, and Derek says he can't fix it. The whole system is down." I sat up straight on my couch, suddenly very alert. The access control system was tied to the same domain controller as everything else. If it was down, that meant something much bigger was wrong with the core infrastructure. "Where's Marcus?" I asked, already knowing this had to be bad if Tom was calling me. "In his car in the parking lot, on the phone, absolutely losing his mind," Tom said. I could hear the stress in his voice. "He told me to call you, unofficially. Please, Alex, can you help? People can't get home. We can't lock the building. It's a disaster." I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. 50 people in the cold. Some of them were my friends, good people who'd never done anything wrong. But I wasn't going to be their unpaid emergency rescue. "Tell Marcus to call me himself," I said firmly. "I'm not doing this through back channels and unofficial requests. He wants my help. He can ask for it directly." Tom sighed. "I figured you'd say that. Can't blame you. I'll tell him." He hung up. I waited. 6 minutes later, my phone rang again. Marcus Webb. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Alex?" His voice was tight and strained. I could hear the desperation underneath the forced calm. "We need your help. The access control system is completely down and Derek can't restore it. I know things ended badly between us, but—" "You walked me out like a criminal," I interrupted, my voice cold and level. "You said I was a security risk. You had Tom escort me through the building like I was being arrested." Silence on the line for a long moment. Then, "I was following company protocol. It wasn't personal." "Your protocol left 50 people locked out in the cold, Marcus. But that's not my problem anymore. You hired experts to replace me, remember? Let them earn their money." "Alex, please." The desperation was clearer now. "What do you want? Just tell me what you want." The question hung there in the air between us. What did I want? I wanted a sincere apology. I wanted acknowledgement that I'd been keeping that place running for 6 years. I wanted them to admit they'd made a massive mistake. But more than anything, I wanted them to understand what institutional expertise actually meant. That it wasn't just something you could outsource to the lowest bidder. I want a new contract, I said clearly. Triple my old salary. 6 months guaranteed, full benefits. And I want it in writing, signed by you and Patricia, before I lift a single finger to help. Marcus exhaled slowly. I'll have to talk to the executive board. You've got 1 hour, I said, looking at my watch. After that, I'm shutting off my phone and you can explain to those 50 people why they're sleeping in their cars tonight. I hung up without waiting for a response. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was adrenaline. I'd just played the biggest card of my life. Either they'd agree to my terms or they'd try to fix it themselves and fail spectacularly. The contract arrived 43 minutes later. It was a PDF attachment in my email, drawn up by Jennifer from HR. I opened it on my laptop and read every single word carefully, checking for loopholes or escape clauses. Triple my previous salary, 6 months guaranteed employment, full benefits including health, dental, and vision, 2 weeks paid vacation, the works. I read it 3 times, then had my roommate, who was a paralegal, read it. Looks solid, she said. They're desperate. Sign it. I signed it digitally and sent it back. Done, I texted Marcus. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Have Tom ready to let me in. I grabbed my laptop bag and drove to the office. The parking lot was absolute chaos. People were standing in clusters, shivering in the evening cold. Some were on their phones calling rides. Others were sitting in their cars with the engines running. A few were glaring at the building like it had personally betrayed them. Tom met me at the main door with a temporary access badge. Thank God, Tom muttered as he handed it to me. It's been 2 hours. People are getting really angry. Derek was in the server room, literally sweating through his polo shirt. He looked up when I walked in and relief flooded his face. Alex, hey, thank you for coming. So the domain controller crashed about 3 hours ago, and I tried to restore it from backup, but... Stop, I said, holding up my hand. Just stop talking for a minute. I sat down at the main terminal and logged in with my hidden admin account. The system was a complete disaster. Derek had tried to force a reboot of the primary domain controller, which corrupted the Active Directory database. Then he'd attempted a restore from backup, but he'd used an old backup from 2 weeks ago instead of the most recent one. When that failed, he tried to manually rebuild the AD structure, which made everything worse. It was like watching someone try to perform surgery with a hammer. I worked in silence for 20 minutes while Derek stood behind me, occasionally offering suggestions that I completely ignored. I rolled back his attempted restore. I rebuilt the Active Directory database from the transaction logs. I forced a replication sync across all domain controllers. Then I restarted the access control service that tied into the AD system. Try it now, I told Tom over the phone. A moment later, I heard the beautiful sound of door locks clicking open throughout the building. People started flooding back inside. How did you do that? Derek asked, staring at the screen. He seemed genuinely curious, not defensive or angry. Experience, I said simply. The documentation you got was enough to keep things running under normal circumstances. But when something breaks, when the system crashes, you need to know how all the pieces fit together. That takes years, not certifications. Derek nodded slowly, absorbing this. I'm in way over my head, aren't I? He asked quietly. Yeah, I said honestly. But that's not your fault. You're good at what you do. You're just not ready to manage a complex system like this alone. Nobody would be after just 2 weeks. He looked relieved, like I'd given him permission to admit he was struggling. Can you teach me? Derek asked. Can you show me how this really works? I thought about it. Derek wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't incompetent. He just didn't have the institutional knowledge. And unlike Marcus, he was willing to admit what he didn't know. Yeah, I said, I can teach you, but it's going to take time. Over the next 2 weeks, I rebuilt what Marcus had tried to tear down. I worked with Derek every single day, walking him through every system, every quirk, every workaround, every late-night emergency fix I'd ever figured out. He was smart, and he learned quickly. And most importantly, he wasn't too proud to ask questions or admit when he didn't understand something. Marcus stayed completely out of my way during this time. He'd send occasional emails checking on progress, asking if things were stable, but he never came down to the server room. I think he was embarrassed and ashamed. Good, he should be. On day 30 of my new contract, I was running a routine security audit, checking logs and reviewing access patterns, when I found something that made my blood run cold. An unauthorized access attempt from an external IP address. Someone had been systematically probing our firewall, testing for vulnerabilities and weaknesses. I traced the attempts back through 3 weeks of logs. They'd started exactly 2 days after I was fired. Whoever was doing this, they'd been patient and methodical. They'd been slowly mapping our network topology, looking for openings and security gaps, and they'd found several thanks to Derek's disabled firewall rules and misconfigured security settings. I pulled all the relevant logs and wrote up a detailed incident report. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus directly. "We've been breached," I said the moment he answered. No preamble, no small talk, no politeness. Marcus was silent for a long moment. I could almost hear his brain processing what I just said. "What do you mean breached?" He was hollow. "Someone's been inside our network for 3 weeks. They've accessed employee records, client data, possibly email archives. I'm still tracing the full extent of the damage, but it's bad." Jesus Christ. His voice went even more hollow. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we're legally required to notify clients and possibly law enforcement," I said. "This is a reportable data breach incident under state and federal laws. We're looking at mandatory disclosure, potential fines, possible lawsuits." I heard him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Can you fix it? Can you make it go away?" "I can stop them from getting any further into the system," I said. "But the damage is already done. We need to bring in forensics experts, notify our legal team, and prepare for serious fallout." Marcus swore quietly under his breath. "How did this happen? How did they get in?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to let that question hang there in the air between us. I wanted him to think about it, to really think about it. "It happened because you fired the person who would have caught this on day 1, I finally said. "It happened because you prioritized cost savings over actual security, and it happened because Derek didn't know what he didn't know. He disabled firewall rules he didn't understand. He left gaps in our defenses." Silence. Then, I made a mistake. It was the first time he'd actually admitted it out loud. "Yeah," I agreed. "You made a massive mistake, and now we all get to pay for it." The next 72 hours were an absolute nightmare. I worked around the clock, barely sleeping, tracing the breach and securing the network. We brought in an outside forensics firm, people who specialized in incident response and data breach investigation. They confirmed what I'd found and made it even worse. The attackers had exfiltrated over 200 gigabytes of sensitive data. Employee social security numbers, client contracts, financial records, proprietary information, everything. Marcus called an emergency meeting with the entire executive team. I sat in the corner of the conference room while he explained the situation. The CEO, a woman named Patricia Chen, looked like she wanted to throw something. "How much is this going to cost us?" she asked the forensics lead. He consulted his notes. Between the investigation, mandatory notification requirements, credit monitoring for affected individuals, potential regulatory fines, and possible legal settlements, you're looking at somewhere between $2 and $3 million. Minimum. Patricia turned slowly to look at Marcus. Her expression was ice. "I thought you said outsourcing security would save the company money." Marcus had no answer. He just sat there looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. "Alex," Patricia said, turning to me, "what should we have done differently? Give me your honest assessment." I chose my words very carefully. Security isn't a line item you can outsource and forget about. It requires someone who knows your specific systems, understands your unique risks, and can respond immediately when something goes wrong. The MSSP is fine for supplemental monitoring and support, but they're watching hundreds of other clients. They don't have the institutional knowledge to catch the subtle anomalies. Patricia nodded slowly. "What do you recommend we do going forward?" "Keep me on permanently," I said simply. "Give Derek time to learn under my supervision. Use the MSSP for after-hours, monitoring, and supplemental support. But you need someone in-house who owns security full-time, someone who lives and breathes this network. She looked at Marcus. Make it happen, today. The meeting ended. Marcus and I stood in the hallway afterward. He looked exhausted and defeated. I really screwed this up, he said quietly. Yeah, I agreed. You did. I thought I was being smart, cutting costs, making us more efficient and modern. You were looking at spreadsheets instead of systems, I said. Security doesn't show up as profit on a quarterly report, Marcus, but when it fails, it shows up as catastrophic loss. He nodded slowly. Marcus offered me my old job back permanently. Not as a contractor. As Director of Information Security. Significant salary increase, better benefits, real budget for security tools and training. I took it. Not because I'd forgiven him or the company, but because I genuinely cared about the work. And because I knew if I left again, the next breach would be even worse. The badge they took from me that day? It's back around my neck now. Blue light blinking. Active. Authorized. Trusted. And this time everyone knows exactly what happens when they take it away.